This is the BBC World Service, and on our website you can explore more of our programmes, from documentaries to science. Listen and download at any time by going to bbcworldservice.com. On air, online and on smartphones, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. I'm Kulpa Party. NATO's fury as Poland intercepts Russian drones in its airspace.
There is no doubt that this provocation is incomparably more dangerous from Poland's point of view than all others. This situation brings us the closest we've been to open conflict since World War II.
As a UN report says child obesity is getting worse, this school in South Africa is finding that healthier food can also be popular.
Today on the menu it's khichdi, which is a mix of dal and rice with tomato chutney, halloumi and salsa.
The latest on the trial of Brazil's former President Jair Bolsonaro that has divided the country, plus a new blood test that could revolutionise the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. That's all coming up after the latest BBC World Service news.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said his country is closer to open conflict than at any time since the Second World War. Poland says its airspace was violated repeatedly by Russian drones during an overnight attack on Ukraine. Some were shot down by Polish and NATO pilots. Sarah Rainsford reports.
Images we've seen suggest some of the drones were Russian Gerberas with no explosives, likely meant to test Europe's defences and its unity. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte called that reckless.
To Putin, I mean, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine, stop violating allied airspace, and know that we stand ready, that we are vigilant, and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
This comes, though, as Russia is escalating its attacks on Ukraine itself, with huge and growing waves of drones and missiles. Now, officials here believe Russia is testing the West, watching how it responds.
Russia's defense ministry said it didn't plan to target Poland and that its drones did not have sufficient range to get there. The Israeli military has launched more airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. The IDF says it struck targets in the capital Sana'a and in Al-Jouf, including military camps, the headquarters of what it called the Houthi Military Propaganda Department, and a fuel storage site. The Houthi Health Ministry says that at least 35 people have been killed and more than 130 wounded. Sebastian Osher reports.
Huge plumes of smoke once again rose above Sana'a as the Israeli military hit new Houthi targets in response, it said, to recent attempted drone and missile attacks by the group on Israel. The Houthi military spokesman said that journalists working for its media outlets are among the dead. Last month, Israel killed many senior members of the Houthis' self-declared government, including their prime minister. They were the most high-profile such assassinations since the Houthis first fired rockets at Israel in support of Hamas shortly after the war in Gaza began. There was a brief respite during the Gaza ceasefire earlier this year, but hostilities resumed when that broke down.
The Qatari Prime Minister has said it's discussing with regional partners a response to the Israeli strike targeting Hamas in Doha on Tuesday. Speaking to CNN, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani said Qatar is now reassessing everything about its role as a mediator, as well as the future of Hamas in the country. The Israeli President Isaac Herzog has held talks with Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. After the meeting, Mr. Herzog said he made clear that Britain's intention to recognise Palestinian statehood would not help bring an end to the conflict. World News from the BBC. Around 500 people have been arrested during anti-government protests across France, including in Paris. Police fired tear gas and water cannon in the southern city of Montpellier, while a bus was set on fire in Rennes to the west. Wednesday's demonstrations were called by a new group calling itself Let's Block Everything, which has supporters from the far left and far right. Brazil's Supreme Court has resumed deliberations in the trial of the former President Jair Bolsonaro. He's accused of plotting a coup after losing the 2022 election to President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. 2 of the 5 Supreme Court judges have already voted to convict Mr. Bolsonaro, who denies all charges. Scientists say they found the most tantalizing evidence yet of past life on Mars. NASA's Perseverance rover has discovered unusually marked rocks containing minerals that researchers believe could have been produced by ancient microbes. Here's Georgina Ranald.
NASA's robot has found rocks on Mars with markings nicknamed leopard spots by scientists and black dots like poppy seeds. These marks are minerals that scientists think could have been produced by chemical reactions associated with microbes. Those microbes would have lived 3.5 billion years ago, when Mars still had an atmosphere. Researchers aren't yet certain if this is a definite sign of life. They say the only way to be sure is to bring the rocks to Earth for more thorough testing.
Prince Harry, who's currently in Britain for a series of engagements, has met his father, King Charles, for the first time since February 2024. The meeting lasted just under an hour. The BBC's royal correspondent says it suggests a shift in mood after the Prince's memoir and a confessional television interview caused a rift within the British royal family. BBC News.
Welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm Krupa Bhatti. It's being called by some a test of NATO's resolve. On Wednesday, Poland became the first member of the Western military alliance to fire shots during Russia's war in Ukraine. Backed by Dutch and Italian fighter jets, at least 3 of the 14 drones found so far were shot down. And in the hours since, Poland has invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which calls for urgent talks with allies for their security. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is furious. He addressed Parliament earlier in the day, saying that he and the President, who is from a different political party, are working together in the interest of the country.
Chcę bardzo mocno podkreślić. Nie ma dzisiaj powodu twierdzić,
I want to emphasize very strongly that there is no reason to claim we're on the brink of war. But there is no doubt that this provocation exceeds the existing boundaries and is incomparably more dangerous from Poland's point of view than all others. This situation brings us the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II.
Agnieszka Pomaska is an MP for the governing Civic Coalition, and she said that she was confident of NATO support for her country, Poland, despite pressure from Moscow.
Of course it's a test, and Russia is testing a NATO alliance as well, so it's a test. But so far we have no doubts that it's our main defense and security alliance.
Let's also take a listen to German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius speaking in Berlin, and he said he believed Russia's drone action had been intentional.
There is no evidence whatsoever that this number of drones could have flown over this route over Poland, Polish territory, by accident. In any case, there's no need to fly along this route to get from Belarus to Ukraine, and this means we can only assume that this action was deliberate.
And then, of course, there's reaction from Donald Trump. So far, that has been limited to a post on Truth Social, where he said, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones?" Here we go. More on that in a moment. But first, I'm joined now on the line from Moscow by the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. Good to have you with us, Steve. A widespread anger here from countries like Germany, as we just heard, and others, that this move was intentional on Russia's part. What is the feeling inside Russia about how and why these attacks came about?
The reaction here has been quite interesting. It's developed through the day. So for several hours, there was no reaction from the Russian authorities. And then we got the first reaction, first comments from the Kremlin, which were basically no comment. Actually, the Kremlin wouldn't say anything about what had happened. Then a short while after that, the Russian Defense Ministry issued a statement basically saying, yes, Russia did strike targets overnight in western Ukraine, military-industrial targets, but no, Russia had no intention of engaging targets on the territory of Poland. An interesting choice of words there. we had no intention of. Not exactly a denial, but a bit later on, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement. Its reaction was, Poland, you are spreading myths, the Foreign Ministry said, although Moscow said it was willing to hold consultations with Warsaw about what had happened to try to de-escalate the situation. And then there's been the reaction of the pro-Kremlin media here, much of which has been accusing Ukraine, Poland, Europe of staging the whole affair as some kind of provocation to put pressure on Russia. This is very familiar language to me, because very often whenever Russia is accused of doing something, particularly by the West, it concludes that attack is the best form of defense. It turns the tables and it points a finger back. We saw that in 2014 after the shooting of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. We saw that in 2018 after the Salisbury poisonings, and to an extent we're seeing it again now.
What can we read into that change of position, or those various positions that you've highlighted across today, that they aren't certain about their position here?
I think the silence that we saw at the beginning of the day is an indication of, well, the authorities didn't know actually what position to present to the Russian public and to the wider world. At some point during the day, the authorities obviously decided how to present this, and we got the statements from the Defense Ministry and then the Foreign Ministry. So it's going to be very interesting to see, I think, whether Poland takes Russia up on the offer of sitting down and talking about what had happened. I mean, that's the offer coming from Moscow today for these consultations in order to de-escalate the situation. Whether that actually happens or not is another matter. And it's also going to be interesting to see what the reaction is going to be from the White House, from Donald Trump. Is this event going to push him into taking stronger action against Moscow?
The Foreign Ministry in Russia says Poland has been spreading myths about the drone incursion, as you've just highlighted. Just give us a sense of how this is being covered inside Russia, how the people of Russia are receiving what has happened.
Yeah, well, I watched the evening news, the main evening news on Russian television a short while ago, and the reporter was hinting very strongly that this was some kind of provocation, suggesting that perhaps Ukraine had engineered this, had sent these drones into Poland in order to bring Europe into a war with Russia. And that's very much the sentiment in some of the pro-Kremlin news sites tonight. That's a similar kind of language, and I expect we're going to see that in the Russian papers tomorrow.
Thanks very much. That's our BBC Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, for us. Let's stay with this story. As I mentioned, we heard from US President Donald Trump weighing in on this situation, posting that short statement on his social media platform, Truth Social, writing, as I said, what's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go. We can decipher what we want from that. But you may recall that it was just a few weeks ago that Trump was celebrating what many of his team believed was a foreign policy win when he met Mr. Putin in Alaska to discuss the war in Ukraine. Let's talk all about this with Kurt Volker, an American diplomat who served as George W. Bush's last U.S. ambassador to NATO. Very good to have you with us. You join us from Kyiv. Can I start with your reaction to this drone incursion over Poland?
Well, as your report just said, there is no possibility that this was an accident. There's no operator in some trailer in some drone park in Moscow who accidentally sent this array of Russian drones into Polish airspace as deeply as they did. This was clearly a test. As for the Russian official statement, I think the significant part is that they said they were not sent to hit targets in Poland. That does not mean that they were not sent in order to test Polish air defenses and test NATO's response, which is what I think they were exactly intended to do. And thus far, NATO's response is ambiguous. Yes, Poland responded directly. They took down a few drones. There was a military response. That's very, very good. But NATO as a whole has not made a clear stand to say this must never happen again. and we will take measures to ensure that it never happens again. That's the kind of thing we need to hear from NATO. And if Putin does not do that, then I think he will feel emboldened that he can play games with NATO airspace as long as he pretends it's all about Ukraine.
And wanting NATO to do more is also something that we've been hearing from President Zelensky of Ukraine across the day as well. Now, Article 4 has been invoked. As I said, this allows member states to start a formal discussion within the alliance about threats to their own security. Explain the significance of that and whether or not it will lead to Article 5 being invoked.
Well, look, Article 4 is very simple. It's about consultations. So a member of NATO feels that there are threats to their security. They are not an immediate attack against that country, which would invoke Article 5. But they want to talk about it with other NATO allies and discuss what actions NATO as a whole might be able to take. Perfectly legitimate, very appropriate in this circumstance. So yes, let's have a consultation under Article 4 of the NATO Treaty, talk about what this means and what we should do about it. Article 5 is when there is an attack against a NATO country. In this case, we had drones that were armed fly in, and they were presenting a threat to the Polish population, but they didn't actually attack anything. So Poland is deliberately saying, we're not declaring Article 5 yet. We are asking for an Article 4 consultation. We need to decide what we need to do. And in my view, NATO needs to send an unequivocal response that this is unacceptable. We cannot allow anyone, Russia or anyone else, to fly aircraft, to fly drones that are armed into our airspace unwanted with the risk that they will attack our populations. That is an unacceptable circumstance.
And what does that response that you talk about look like?
Yes, my recommendation to NATO would be now NATO needs to declare an extended air defense zone. So not just the territory, of Poland and Romania and Slovakia going straight up from the border. We need to declare an extended air defense zone, say 200 kilometers, so that we don't want any unidentified flying objects, if you call it that, coming into that territory because of the risk they could pose to NATO populations. So we will have an extended air defense zone in cooperation with Ukraine to make sure that there's nothing that's going to threaten NATO country populations. And this is very important that we're not talking about NATO defending Ukraine, which has been a red line for the Biden administration, a bit for the Trump administration, provocative perhaps to Russia. Russia has made this about NATO. So we need to say we are not going to allow that. We will defend our populations, and we will declare an extended air defense zone to make sure that nothing comes in that's going to threaten our people.
Mr. Trump, of course, continues to pitch himself as a peacemaker, but events both in Poland and what we saw in Doha yesterday as well have really thrown that position into question. In terms of what he has the capacity to do at this stage, he's threatened tougher sanctions against Russia. Might we see anything of the sort from him? Who's pulling the strings here, really?
Well, in the U.S. administration, it's clear that only President Trump is making the decisions. I don't believe any of the other cabinet secretaries or other senior officials really have decision-making power. Everything goes back to President Trump. I think President Trump is deliberately avoiding tough measures against Putin and Russia because he wants to get a deal at the end. He doesn't want to impose things that are creating obstructions. He wants to entice Putin. He wants to create good conditions. He wants to get a deal. Unfortunately, Putin understands that game and will play it. And what Putin is doing is pocketing everything that Trump gives him, demanding more and continuing to escalate militarily.
My apologies, Ambassador Kurt Volker. We will have to leave it there, but we appreciate your expertise here on NewsHour. Stay with us. There is plenty more coming up. Coming up, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has apologised to Greenlandic women and their families impacted by what she called systematic discrimination during a contraceptive campaign. We'll get a response from Greenland.
This apology it's just words with no will to act. We have to make sure that the attempted erasure of our people is not only for Denmark or Mette Frederiksen to use as a public relations tool, but we should actually make sure that real action is being taken to prevent these stuffs from happening again.
And our headlines, Poland's Prime Minister says his country is at its closest to conflict since the Second World War, accusing Russia of sending drones to violate Polish airspace. And the Israeli military has launched more airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. Its health ministry says more than 30 people have been killed. Our top story this hour, Poland's Prime Minister says his country is at its closest to conflict since the Second World War, accusing Russia of sending drones to violate Polish airspace. Earlier, the former US ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, told NewsHour that the response of the transatlantic alliance has been ambiguous.
NATO as a whole has not made a clear stand to say this must never happen again, and we will take measures to ensure that it never happens again. That's the kind of thing we need to hear from NATO. And if Putin does not hear that, then I think he will feel emboldened that he can play games with NATO airspace as long as he pretends it's all about Ukraine.
And our headlines, the Israeli military has launched more airstrikes on Houthi rebels targets in Yemen. Its health ministry says more than 30 people have been killed. This is Krupa Baji with NewsHour live from the BBC in London. Back to our top story now, that Poland's Prime Minister says his country is at its closest to conflict since the Second World War, accusing Russia of sending drones to violate Polish airspace. We've heard a European and American reaction, but how is this all being received by Kyiv? Dennis Schimmel is Ukraine's Minister of Defence, and he's taken up the position in July. Before that, he served for 5 years as the country's Prime Minister. Mr. Schimmel came into our studios here in central London to speak with NewsHour's James Kumarasamy a little earlier. So what is his reaction to today's events?
Russia first time intentionally attacked NATO member country, and it was drone decoys, but in any way there was explosive materials. It was drones which just test NATO country on the reaction. So I'm sure that Russia just look and calculate and make measures how long it will take for one or second, third and other decisions from Poland, from NATO countries. It was first reason. Second reason, it was shift the attention from the crimes of war, crimes of aggression in Ukraine for last weeks. Yesterday, 21 pensioners, while they were waiting for their pensions, were killed in the Donetsk region by guided aerial bomb. So today Russia shifted attention of the global community to the Poland, to this attack. But this night, at the same time, Ukraine was under attack of 415 battle drones, more than 20 cruise missiles, 5 ballistic missiles, so everything was at the same night.
What is Russia's intention then of shifting that? Why would they be doing that?
Russia understands that they are making war crimes, crimes of aggression on daily basis, so they shift this attention. They demonstrate that they have no intention to stop this war. They demonstrate that there is no matter for them who asks them about peace, United States, Europe, all the civilized world, they continue implement their doctrine, their strategy, they continue their aggressive policy against all of the civilized world.
This evening, President Zelensky has said there was a lack of action from NATO countries in response to what happened. What's your view?
Today, after night attack, we have very good conversation with closed doors among E5 ministers. We discussed possible reactions. From my point of view, there should be strong sanctions on Russia, and from all sides, from all of the allies, United States, European Union should implement this secondary sanctions on Russian oil, gas, nuclear fuel, on the countries which supply to Russia spare parts for their missiles. So all of this should continue and increase pressure on Russian economy, on Russian elites, on Russian society, because now they have no intention to stop this.
And is that what you are hearing from your colleagues, that will happen?
I hope so. I hope so, because all NATO members, all civilized world, all Europe are really concerned about this case. We all understand that it was not unintentional.
The Kremlin says they had not planned to hit any locations in Poland.
They don't hit any significant locations, so all of these drones were or destroyed or fall down in the field. They destroy, unfortunately, one living house. There was no casualties, thanks God, but it was attacked because it was going not through the Ukrainian territory, it also were going through the Belarus. It means that Russia intentionally sent this quantity of drones on NATO country just to calculate and measure.
Should NATO countries be playing more of a role in actually shooting down Russian drones over Ukrainian airspace, perhaps?
We ask about this, so we have many negotiations during this wartime with our neighbor countries about possibility to use their equipment, Patriot systems, F-16, F-35, as a capacity to destroy drones which are flying near of the border, for example, in 100 kilometers zone from our border with European Union. We will continue these discussions. Maybe it will be possible after this aggression. Now Russia begin attack NATO countries in military domain, and it means new reality.
So is this a watershed moment?
This is important moment. This is a moment when I think NATO allies, European civilizations realize that world is changed and that Russian aggression on Ukrainian territory is not just between Russia and Ukraine. This is part of global Russian strategy, and not just Russian, because now Russia acts not itself alone. It acts together with Belarus, together with North Korea, together with Iran, with support of some other allies. We are so much grateful to all allies for all kind of support. We need now more coordination and more pressure on Russia, as on the front line with strengthening Ukraine defense forces, so and with sanctions pressure, so secondary sanctions on oil, gas, nuclear fuel. So this is a way how to bring Putin to the negotiation table.
President Trump has tried something different, though, hasn't he? He has tried to bring him over, to roll out the red carpet, as we saw in Alaska, to say, you know, he thinks that President Putin wants to do a deal for him, President Trump. He was caught saying that on a microphone. Has his approach failed? Has it made matters worse?
I believe that President Trump has gave Putin a chance, but Putin don't understand that it was a chance. And now I believe that President Trump will go to the next steps, and I believe that Congress of United States will implement this very tough legislation with secondary sanctions, with these strong sanctions on the countries which will buy Russian oil and gas, and it will lead to the new reality for Russia. And I believe that it will create this situation when Putin will not want, he will need to go to the negotiation. So this is the way which we need to use.
Because President Putin has been saying, I think he said it in Beijing when he was there last week, that he has an agreement with Donald Trump. Donald Trump understands certain things, we don't know what, but you think President Trump is going to take tough action. Now, he's on his Truth Social platform has written, "Here we go," rather enigmatically today after the attack in Poland.
You know, there was very good meeting between President Trump with my president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. It was really good meeting, not just diplomatically or formally, it was really a very friendly meeting last time. It was very long meeting. There was possibility to explain all the details of this aggression, all of the details, how everything is going there in Ukraine. So I believe that in the result of this meeting, President Trump has absolutely clear understanding what is happening.
Ukraine's Defense Minister, and that's News Hour.